Chapter 15. Revelations in the Timeless Land. There are no foreign lands. It is the traveler only who is foreign. Robert Louis Stevenson. The Silverado Squatters. He was probably English, but I don't know. I should know that. He wrote Treasure Island. Anyway. Something irritated his forehead like wet sandpaper. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. He saw a familiar old man's face and that of a cat. What happened? The old man asked. You're Carl. I remember you, said Ethan, then coughed briefly and water came out. It was not salt water. He took a huge breath as he hawked up what he had inhaled and adrenaline hit him. He soon woke up totally, taking a deeper breath, jumping to his feet and pacing swiftly around the pebbly shore, feeling his body. Carl blinked at him. You have a new barada. Ethan felt his face. Yeah, I guess I do have a bit of a beard. The ship, you fell out, and it broke into little discs, then flew away. How long have I been gone? Ethan felt his face, a sinking in his stomach. Carl squinted. Couldn't have been 10 minutes. Here. 2 weeks at home. How long since Chloe, her real name's Claire, how long since Claire was taken? Oh, 18 minutes or so in the time of this place, maybe 20. That's about 3 weeks, our time. Give or take a few days. I don't know exactly. They had me on a slab under some sort of white slime cheese sheet, Ethan began, quickly relating everything he knew. It took him only a few minutes to give a summary. He rushed along, knowing time was of the essence, knowing they had to find Chloe Claire now, knowing he still had to convince Carl that such an undertaking was worth doing. Carl determined where Ethan was headed with his story well before the young man was done. It was a sales pitch to get the girl. Even so, a detail of the account caught his attention, and he interrupted. You said it was like the dacha. They were walking briskly up the stone-strewn beach toward the trail in the green hills, the cat trotting merrily along beside them. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but I see where you went and remodeled a bit. Yes, that is part of it. Ethan, you remember the cat has a grudge. Ethan's face went blank. He looked at Slinky, then back at Carl. Oh, yeah. Really hasn't been that long. He exhaled. There's time. Well, yes and no. If you're going to save her, you're going to have to act quick. They do different things to women than men. What? Did you see any women where you just were? Ethan's eyes widened. Not a single one. Yeah, there are different things that men and women are good to for them. How soon can we get her? How do you know I will help you now? Carl replied. Ethan got in front of him and grabbed him by the shoulders. Carl, I'm alive because of two things. Jesus, and I wanted to do the right thing by that girl. The angel said as much. Malkuthal. Ah, yes, Malkuthal. Kingdom of God. Mine is Rusopikun, guardian of Russia. I've only met him twice. Well, but I can't just turn back now, can I, Carl? I haven't told you an awful lot about myself. I know they do different things with women, any of that. Incidentally, do you notice I'm talking more clearly? Ethan's eyebrows crunched together. Yes, actually. Da voda, v ktoroj môj buvie. Eto znanie человечества. So you can just drink knowledge in this place, eh? What did I just say to you, Ethan? You said the water we were in is the knowledge of man. Whoa! Crazy, right? Language barriers. Gone with that stuff. Blew my mind when I found out. Different compounds do different things here for different reasons, have different relationships. But you're not dead or black-eyed. I think we can work together now, Ethan. We are men unstuck in time and space with something to save. He pulled out the folded map he had taken a risk to bring earlier and slapped it against his palm. It wasn't just paper, it was actually cloth or some other sturdy material. Carl continued, I have been making this since a few years after I stumbled into this weird place. I, too, am keeping careful track of every minute that passes and every day that rushes by in the real world. I, too, have one I love locked in the domain of these frog-eyed demons. So listen, Ethan, we've got to get somewhere relatively safe and we've got to make it through the next 11 hours or so. You need to be brought up to speed and the cat needs a snack and a nap so she forgets that the government Chad threw her into a wall several minutes ago. I had planned to go it alone with the dacha at our disposal. I see now God did send me you. There was more to my plan I needed to do, but if you are here and you know Christ and your soul is redeemed and getting brighter, at one, 1,000 run, by two, 10,000 flee. You're an orphan, aren't you? Ethan shook his head. No, I'm not an orphan. But Mom left Dad when I was about 7 and took me with to Cali, then got into that bad dope. And I ain't seen her ever since. Well, in years anyway. Had to deal with the state, found out I'm good with computers. I haven't seen her since I haven't seen Dad, I haven't seen any of them since, no cap, before I was a legal adult by a few months, long time. A spiritual orphan then. Makes sense. People who come here, well, you shouldn't have to end up here. Something happened to you. Something that is not strictly your fault. Alright, Ethan, follow me. I know a spot nearby that is safe. Carl led them to a ravine that stretched off the path and was immediately occluded by bushes. Carl went to the bushes and he pulled on the leaves. It turned out the leaves of these particular bushes were just a disguise for a door to a camper that looked like it had been transported straight from the 70s, though everything inside was brand new. Carl looked around behind them and pulled the door closed, then yanked on another gravity light he had installed. He went to a fridge and pulled out a pitcher of water. From the sea, he said. It isn't really salty in that sea, you notice? Not like our own seas. It is pure. He poured Ethan and himself a cup, then sat down. The gray ones, they can't hurt you unless you let yourself get tricked. Even without God, there are limitations to what they can do. You have to be in agreement with them. They find ways of tricking you into agreement, like governments or lawyers. With Christ they have no right, and His Holy Spirit brings you discernment that becomes increasingly clear in time. However, the ones the demons have tricked, those guys can kill you. Like Buford. Exactly, like Buford. Remember what I say? He's an idiot, a retard. Well, now I've got a few more words to help give you some background. Basically, he's ideologically slave to their delusion. He's hypnotized, and he's living off a sort of emotional, spiritual high that comes not only from the, shall we say, supplements he takes, but from the energy he gets when he does things he knows are downright wrong. He reminds me of people microdosing out in San Fran, only he didn't do anything micro. Yeah, there's some of that at play here. Anyway, they're going to come after us in the next 12 to 36 hours, depending. We'll be safe here until we can figure out our plan of attack, I hope. How is it there's a camper out here? I built it in one piece at a time after about 10 years in our world. I'm always fixing it up and other measures. I've taken also, well, there is maintenance necessary. This is one of the reasons I have to come and go so much with the cat. You built this? Like piece by piece? Well, it didn't need any of the engine or axle components. It's not like I'm going to take it anywhere. It's just a bunker. He patted faux wood paneling above the dinette where they sat under the dim gravity light. I don't even know what I just knocked over. Then turned his eyes back to Ethan. You have no idea the bartering I had to do between portals to finance myself the last couple of decades. It's been a full-time job. All right, let me get you up to speed. Remember when that government creep called Slinky a Baba Yaga cat back at my house? Yeah, I remember that. Do you know what Baba Yaga is? John Wick? Ethan looked perplexed, but still made a joke out of it. I mean, 'cause of the water, I know now weirdly that the words Baba Yaga means something like Granny Snake. The context of that, though, Carl laughed out loud. No, it's not John Wick. Granny Snake, that's so much closer. Baba Yaga is a baby-eating witch out of Russian lore. It can be translated as boogeyman, but that's not what it means. Baba Yaga apparently lives in a house with chicken legs that roams through the forests of Russia, snatching errant children and boiling them in a pot. You know, Hansel and Gretel type stuff, but Russian style. There's a deeper connotation to those legends, though. See, when I was a kid... Have you heard of Maya? Probably not. It's southeast of Yakutsk in deep eastern Siberia, which means it's basically an ice cube until everybody sweats for a month and the winter comes back in. When I was little, my family moved to a village near Maya to the east among the trees. So many little ponds and lakes. You may get to see it. It is where the dacha is. Ethan was paying attention, but it was strange hearing Russian words with the same understanding as English, and at moments during their discussion, he completely lost the ability to distinguish between languages. It was like his vocabulary had more than doubled. Carl was still talking. When the Soviets took over, they bit off so much more than they could chew. Many lands they took without a fight. Others they took by terror. But in the north, in the far east, their grasp was tenuous. Yakuts had Soviet overlords like flies on reindeer droppings. Maya, not so much. The village we were in was even more lax. Our community had 100 people, which they forced into an apartment complex so they could use evacuated infrastructure for government needs. This worked abominably, and they eventually had to transform vacant floors into government offices, while the old homes of the peasants descended to rot. The end result was an implosion of the entire town, but that happened long after I left. The reason they had to be there, Ethan, was because of the Baba Yaga legends. She was well known in the region, and there was even a house strongly associated with her near town, but not in town. It was 10 kilometers by road, off a tiny dirt path that looked like only the deer remembered it was there. If I recall correctly, there was many shortcuts in the woods to that house. I knew them well as a child. In that structure, that dacha, that Baba Yaga house, my parents did experiments. All the little boys and girls in the village would tell me how wild and crazy it was, and what evil my family were involved in on behalf of the government. I took it in stride. I already knew they were simply ignorant. You see, I'd moved there by my family. I had been moved. I was born in Moscow. I remember Moscow, very little, but I remember large, vibrant buildings and very much cold. I lived years with my parents in that little government housing complex out beyond Maya as it froze through many winters and basically fell apart at the same rate they built it. We would spend time in the dacha as well, the Baba Yaga house with its spindly chicken legs. I still have yet to see those, however. I would have such dreams there, and I would hear such sounds from the basement. I remember dimly when we first moved in that everything was silvery inside. We built over the silvery surfaces to live there. That's what it was like in the cylinder, man, all mirrors. So, it is the same. I guess so. My parents spent a long time covering it with wood, remodeling the inside so it merely appeared to be idiosyncratic Tsarist architecture. I remember the work, but it did not stop there. They were working for the government, working on the technology to win against the capitalist imperialists in the West, and truly on the trail of a magnificent breakthrough. In fact, they found it, and that is why we are here. It was rooted in the Baba Yaga legends, and the local one particularly. In the legends of Maya, Baba Yaga used a cat to lure the children deep into the forest, where they became lost until they find themselves at her chicken house, and she takes them and eats them, and then her house walks away in the forest, and the children are never to be seen again. Certainly that sounds like something a parent tells their young one to keep them from wandering off at night, no? To keep them from interfacing with strange animals. Yeah, I could see that, Ethan said. My thoughts as a child. But there was so much more to it, and apparently the government types in Soviet times were not the only ones who knew, as those ache men prove. The Cold War brought many hidden government projects to put them at a technological advantage over their adversaries. Some of those pursuits involved exploring forbidden religious traditions, the type associated with Baba Yaga. It was the rebels of God worming their way into the machinations of government, as they always have, but in different expressions. They live from us, Ethan. They leech from us. They use us if we can be used. The elites have always known this, and it is the elites who brought the Soviets and more. We are taught to think of America and Russia as the capitalists and the communists. But what if I tell you, Ethan, that the capitalists fund the communists, that the richest in the world work together behind the scenes to consolidate power over all humanity at the behest of spiritual darkness of a kind so malevolent it beggars the imagination? And what if I tell you for many years such things have been going on? What if I tell you the Industrial Revolution and the informational technocracy that wraps the world today have been seeded into mankind's culture deliberately toward a final time, a specific moment? And what if I tell you in that moment the darkened forces at the edge of reality will seek to take over our world? I'd be a lot more likely to take you serious in light of this yikes buffet, Ethan acknowledged. But before it all, the same agenda is in play. Before the technology, before the knowledge was still given the elite, and it involves taking advantage of us to harvest our life force as we might shear a sheep. but not so beneficial a relationship for us, the sheep. Like when the greys, whatever they are, were like grown from the people on the slabs in the ship. Precisely. Only it's not the grey suit that is the creature, it's that green slime. I knew it! It's a spiritual energy that yet occupies a dimensionality strange from ours. As we eat food, they have emotional sustenance needs, needs that have been made perverse in rebellion, and are so being calibrated to the negative side of human emotions. Each green glob is it is the remains of a being that should not have been, but was. Long, long ago, before Noah's flood, there were billions on this planet as today, but they were infected at a genetic level by the demonic, such that all save 8 souls had bowed to their evils. Many millions were entirely human. Excuse me. Many millions were entirely inhuman, wrought from a mixture of genetic substance sourced from human females and matured through auspices of the fallen, angels who rebelled against God himself. A third of them followed Satan, and when they arrive here, what do they find? Why, there were far fewer of them than there were of the heavenly host. So they make reinforcements. They leached from the creative capacity of mankind and combined with their own capability as helpers. The final outcome were these titanic, monstrous things. Indeed, the very titans as remembered by the Greeks. But the deluge took the embodiment of those things, leaving them in a sort of spiritual limbo. And so many millions, perhaps billions, were in that limbo, the children of the fallen. So since then, they have sought embodiment. But the world has changed. Mankind has changed. The tree of humanity has grown. So in the darkness of the demon hordes, it has itself found a way to compound. The darkness is greater. They always thrived from hatred and terror. Now, with the help of modern men who themselves pursue the evil, they have perfected their consumption of this emotion. They romance those they abuse with lies, then take them. The fear of the men on those slabs was being used as a fuel to produce metaphysical tools, shall we say. The same sorts of techniques took on a different expression in different eras of history after the deluge, because a greater amount of infernal energy had to be used to achieve sought outcomes. This required more strategy. It required tactical maneuverability. Just as mankind is changing, developing, and moving, so also are these parasites. In eras before the Soviets, they harvested from the villages, they hid among the pines, and just as there are more than one type of animal on a farm, there are different uses for humans than there are for non-humans. All of the Creator's animals have their own talents, their own abilities. A cat you cannot see her, she is off frame. A cat is particularly capable of finding nodal points in reality, holes in the fabric of space and time. Space and time grow old like a garment, Ethan. Our created universe certainly has its own expiration. A cat can sense the features of this expiration, but a normal cat can do nothing with that information. A Baba Yaga cat becomes like a water witch, you know? The forked stick used to find underground water. There is a molecular reality cats can interact with at the dimensional level. Your brain, my brain, our brains act like receivers to signals, a radio's antenna. No cap, I felt like that in the ship. It was like they were pushing me to be scared out of my mind. Precisely. Light through a diode makes a laser beam. A cat's mind is like a different diode than yours or mine. You can get a different kind of beam. That would be useless for opening portals, but they can find things anyway. What the elite under the spell of the creatures would do before our technological age involved ritual and sacrifice. It was the difference between building the very first automobile and today's assembly line efficiency. Today's factories, they are computerized. Before, it was necessary to employ more workers along the line. Now, not nearly so much involvement is necessary. There's an automated element to it. My dacha, I did not quite realize it was part of a larger vessel until today with you, mind you, but it was known that my dacha was a piece of non-human infrastructure, a piece of that technology you just saw today. Ancient technology, but breaking into our world ever faster. There is something with those mirrors, a reason they must be covered up. Fam, it has felt like so much more than just one day. Certainly, certainly. I don't know your consciousness during the event, but by that beard, it's easy to see you were at least a week among the Dark Ones in the normal world. Carl folded back a curtain and looked through one of the windows covered in faux foliage. A moment later, he replaced it and turned back to Ethan at the dinette, pulling the weight down on the gravity light in the process. It was halfway back up. A good 5 minutes had elapsed. Ethan spoke up. But, this is all fascinating and everything, but, how does this relate to... We're going to be here a little while, Ethan. I am condensing a lifetime of knowledge for you. You've got to bear with me. Alright, fair. So, in an information sense, the universe God has made is deeply mathematical. It's rather like a simulation on a computer. We talked about your favorite game, right? So many atoms, molecules, and interrelated energies are in this symphonic resonance of continuity perfectly designed by God Himself. To pierce through that requires calculating around quite a few variables. But if you can't figure them out and find a pattern and build from there, a way forward emerges. The Soviets wanted a way to teleport. There was already psychic research going on all over the world at that time. I wonder if it has ever ceased. It's just rebranded sorcery in reality. Rebellion. At any rate, they dabbled in telekinesis. They explored psychological methods involving drugs and mind control. This was part of that program, but another tactic was in play. That tactic was using computational capability to plot anomalous points in time and space. In the basement of the dacha, the Baba Yaga house our government had reclaimed through elite avenues, there was a point of mathematical variance identified by robust and unique energy signatures. You've heard of ley lines? Yeah. Something like this. This information is not something I ever found directly, keep in mind, so forgive my vagueness. The difficulty was, in order to properly exploit said energy, required calculating variables in a superpositional state. Just a few years ago in the USA, quantum computation was facilitated in the most pragmatically viable way associated theory has ever been applied. This was nowhere near existence when I was young, and my parents went to crack the code. Quantum mechanics was quite new, and wild molecular properties defined this tiny, strange structure out in the woods of Siberia. The government shuffled them out there, and they renovated the place, made it look non-suspicious, covered the mirrors, as I said. Soon they became part of the town and got into a pattern of regular experimentation on the stone in the basement, that rock face we entered this world through. They would try everything, systematically approaching a variety of methods for many years. It was a happy accident that brought a change. There were wild cats in the region, the darkest black cats you've ever seen, like Slinky. She responded to her name and jumped up on the table with them. Ethan went to pet her, but she made a noise that made him reconsider. Carl scratched her behind the ears. This kitty is the daughter of one of these cats, who themselves have a history in older ritual, and so a pre-existing inclination toward opening portals. Slinky crept into our space-age dacha owing to myself. I let her mother cat in, because I was lonely, and the other children did not know how to handle me. So many of them were Yakuts, and I was a pale Baba Yaga child they would hardly trust. I let the kitty in. I fed her, not knowing she had a litter of kittens inside her belly and would give birth several months before spring. She just wanted a safe place to do so. Well, she made her way into the basement, sleeping regularly behind that stone at a time when my parents were utilizing a hyper-cooled electromagnetic device to cast an energy field around the rock. The cat was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or perhaps the right place at the right time, depending on how you look at it. She got seriously zapped. This bridged a sort of metaphysical connection within the feline, activating whatever was in her latent biological history that was previously associated with such metaphysical tinkering. A portal opened. My parents in the basement, of course, had their minds blown and made quite a commotion. I guessed correctly that the cat had something to do with it and crept to the top of the stair to see. I was in time to catch the animal getting spooked and running through the portal without hesitation. As you know, time is slower here through such portals. 12 seconds here, 2 hours at home. My parents were scientists and they watched the cat, but they were not so foolish as to follow immediately after. For one thing, my father went around the other side of the rock and saw there was no exit to the portal. For another, this was entirely unexpected. The portal closed within 30 minutes as the cat made her way out of range. This was a huge, confusing breakthrough, prompting much research and theorizing. I don't remember it all, but because of what happened later, I have thought on it nigh continuously throughout my life. They arrived at the conclusion the cat's mind was capable of delineating variables at an instinctual level from a superpositional state. It could do what we are now able to do with powerful quantum computers, in a sense. The animal just needed to have its mind resonant with the proper frequency of the proper energy. In the weeks that followed, my parents researched the Baba Yaga legends, specifically those regarding the cat. A very nasty ritual involving human sacrifice had been necessary to imbue the animals with their powers before, to harness what the lens of a cat's brain can do. This is how they initiated the relationship between the electromagnetic energies and what they had witnessed almost by chance. Of course, as you must be starting to expect, there is no chance, there is only truth, and there is the woven design of the Creator's own tapestry. We are but threads among the weave. Ethan blinked. Yeah, of course. In times of yore, crystals, enchanting, and compounds with magnetic properties and the like were involved, and the old pagans thought they were so mystical, when in reality they were just bridging circuits and the like around rips in the fabric of reality. The interdimensional brigands you and I contend with make a game of wasting the time of humans on pointless, faux profound rituals designed more for self-hypnosis and obeisance than any actual practicality. So they manipulated the elite in the past. But mom and dad, they found the unvarnished, unsweetened raw potential all on their own. The cat returned through another portal in the woods and came back to the house during a snowstorm a week later, where she had her kittens. Meanwhile, my parents began to become friendly with the cat, and they devised a harness and they began to conduct experiments. They would be gone for long, long periods of time. They left me alone, all on my own, for several weeks once. Now, of course, I know it was only a few minutes to them, but then to me, so young, it was quite terrifying. They could only tell me some of what they were up to. At one point, many government men came and threw down an ultimatum which my father challenged and apparently won, for they returned later and reversed whatever restrictions had been on the table. See, at the time, I thought it was a religious thing. I had seen them researching the relationship between the cat and the stone and the electromagnetic connection. As I said, it would develop that the cat essentially became code translation, much as modern methods of attaining data from superpositional states are used in quantum computing. The cat was, in effect, acting as a quantum computer would in a technological system. My parents were beginning to map the entry points where the animal would go. The first one they found came up conveniently in the basement of that house and trail where I live. It seems somehow someone at some time already had used this method of travel. That's the conclusion my parents came to. What else could it be? Yet they did not own the house, so they had to conduct an operation to acquire it. And this is what the government men had been arguing with them about. My father managed to pass a message along to the USSR men, acting as a sleeper in the United States, and they relented. The Soviets actually gave him some serious space, which is remarkable, but it goes to show the level of expectation they had. He was cagey about his methods, and there was little chance they would stumble on them of their own accord. Again, my young mind thought it all had to do with some ritual. The context I would not understand until I found their writings in that house and trail later. What I did begin to do is follow them. They had let me keep a kitty. But why would they disappear for so long? For them it was minutes. For me it was hours, or days, or weeks. Of course I was an obedient young Soviet. I would do as I was told, where I could be seen. As soon as they were gone, I spent my days exploring the woods or learning hidden infrastructural interstices of the apartment complex where we would invariably spend most winters, unless of course a breakthrough came and we had to stay at the dacha. I saw them with my little cat, so I found one of her kittens to keep me company. Even Slinky here. She had curled up on the table of the dinette and begun to nap as Carl continued his story and scratched her behind the ears. I took her with me, and I followed through when things got slow before the connection had broken. I followed them all the way to the house in Trail, and here I came against quite a difficulty. Time is faster in our world than this one. They went through to Trail and the portal immediately closed. I was distraught and quite frightened, and I had reason to be. I was somewhere I should not have been. This little girl, this little kitty, he scratched her head in emphasis. She opened up the door right up. She opened the door right up for me. It was good I had brought her along. You see, the ability of the mama cat, it had been transferred to her, I don't know how. I was able to follow my parents with impunity. They were days away from presenting to those who managed them in government. I saw them checking in at the office or sending other regular communications with increasing frequency. But it ended one day, Ethan. I was young. I did not know God. I was a Soviet. My parents had heard of God, but they had such thinking purged from them by those Marxist monsters in that day. Instead of resisting, they had succumbed and even encouraged this progressive thinking. They taught me, and I accepted wholeheartedly. How could I do anything else? Carl paused to reset the gravity lamp. But Ethan, I was not old enough. I did not know what I did not know. So many people are this way. God has mercy because He knows what we do not. The true motivations in men's hearts. The true misunderstandings we have. The apprehensions we grow into. The false pretenses under which we operate. And our brokenness. This is why God weighs the hearts. He weighed my heart and found it sincere and misinformed. I was not yet at an age of accountability. I was so young and inexperienced, and all was magical and mystical, and I understood it so poorly. Still, I was not totally naive. I knew what power meant, and I knew the people from the government were ruthless when they felt the need to be. One day, in this strange place, in that twilight cave where we floated, for they also began taking circuitous routes between locations when they began to understand the time differences. Something was transmitted from my father or my mother's mind. That stink, that resonance, that signal. It brought the cylinders like flies. I tried to follow but could not. I saw them taken in a ship. I was panicked. I took Slinky and I made my way home, and not knowing what to do, I contacted the government men in town. They knew something was wrong, but had forgotten all about me. When I showed up, I was a relief to them because I could be their scapegoat. I was young, I was small, I was Soviet, scrappy, and as I said, non-naive. They reckoned I knew less than I did. Believe it or not, Ethan, those men sought to pin the disappearance of my parents on me. They knew well that something else had happened, but it was covert, you see. They had reason to believe you in America had similar technology, and this could not get out at any cost. So the wildest story was concocted for its strange believability that a child in the country, left among the Yakuts locals, went wild, murdering his family and killing himself in a bloody display of violence rooted in the regional religious rituals of the locals. It would simultaneously give the government an excuse to go after local populations with renewed vigor through a foreseen increase in funding, and also allow for further religious destruction. It was not only Orthodox Christianity the Soviets attacked, but all faiths in all places wherever they could. For a Marxist state to function, the state must take the place of all religious faiths, as there is a sort of psycho-spiritual need for the numinous in all mankind. This is why so many Marxist countries develop cults of personality. They are simply substituting Marxism for previous local religions. Accordingly, any fully Marxist government will always attack all religions. As Marx himself said, religion is the opiate of the masses. So it was then, if a religion could be a target, it would be. The government men had accordingly concocted a tight little plan to cover their backsides and initiate reprisals against competing ideologies. I heard the government men speaking, using vocabulary they assumed I would not understand. Me, who had snuck into my parents' experimentation areas and read their notes while they were gone, sometimes weeks at a time. I escaped owing to the porous infrastructure of their poorly organized dictatorial enforcement. That and perhaps a little help from God or his angels. I said the area imploded before. Well, it was razed to the ground. The village near Maya. It's like a haunted no-go zone in the woods now, a burnt-out, nature-claimed ghost town, and the Baba Yaga dacha several kilometers away. Things would have been worse if they had me for their cover story, but they were still able to initiate profound abuses on the locals. Thankfully, I didn't see any of this or know it was coming. I only found out much later when I realized their horrible plans for me, though. I immediately took the first opportunity I saw, and simply I ran. I make to the cabin, the dacha, the Baba Yaga house that had become a metaphysical laboratory exploring an interstice between ancient pagan ritual and modern computation. I found Slinky where she was among her siblings in the woods. I brought her to the basement and I passed through the trail. I did not know what to do at first, so I spent my time learning what my parents had learned and trying to find food. Seldom did I venture into the strange world, even if the cat wanted to. She's very good about waiting for me, I suspect because we began traveling together when she was very little. Unless, of course, she is in a bad mood. And over the years, she has left me before. She has spent days in this place while I wondered whether or not she had died during the years that trickled by in the real world. How else could she still be with me after all this time? Cats don't live nearly so long as humans. By my estimation, she is only 7 years old. She has developed an attitude. She has disappeared. And this has happened many times. But cat problems notwithstanding, I learned all I could from the resources at the cabin and trail, which was little. As yet I was still under the penumbra of diminished accountability. One day Slinky and I found a portal somewhere other than the house, for we also explored the town. It is not always ships where the black-eyed creatures keep those whom they have stolen. There is a great tower shaped like a mighty conch shell, a ziggurat, if you will, much like you might imagine when you read the account of the Tower of Babel. It is here, in this world. Carl made a circular gesture designed to take in everything, then continued. I have seen it, like a conch shell upside down, the point to the sky. It has a spiral in the middle, Ethan. That spiral, it is mirrored. Like the ship. Like the ship. But see, my mom and dad, they didn't know what they were really getting themselves into. My parents had come into this place utilizing a method that was of a more antiquated variety than what has become the norm among the Greys today. Even though my parents didn't know God, they yet represented a huge metaphysical loophole for the demons. Very soon were they conditioned to regard these creatures around them as extraterrestrials from Orion or Pleiades or some such star system. Benevolent creatures, here to share technology. Their eyes became black as Buford. You remember Buford. But what you saw in Buford, see, the creatures were progressing then as we and they are now. But they move much faster in this place than we can, though it takes a long time comparatively. My parents were good Soviets. They were willing participants in this experiment between interplanetary peoples, meanwhile treasuring their own designs. You see how attractive is the lie. They became liaisons between the demons and varying countries, puppets of the demons. This is how they were killed. I had grown several years to the point where accountability knocked. On one excursion into this place, I found them, and I pled with them, and they went to deceive me and find from where I had come, so they could take me to the rest of the demons. I had watched them play this routine on other humans, Ranfields ushering in victims to their alien Draculas. I know the game. I did not fall for it, and I fled. This prompted them to take a small cylindrical vessel into the real world to fetch me, or rather, they were used as marionettes in this way by their demon masters. My parents were. I was able to spy on them as they made plans to come after me. I was able to see them get in a small vessel. I was able to see it transition. It was brought down by American Defense Forces in South Dakota. This was not my doing. How could I have influenced American defenses? But they came to South Dakota searching for me. Few heard about this incident. I only knew because, as I said, I was spying on them when they went to find me, and half my father made it back. They tried to transition at the wrong point after a military attack. He was cut in two from the waist down, then quickly expired in bloody horror. Their vessel was split in two. It was an awful thing to see. Even so, in a certain sense, this was perhaps a mercy for them. Perhaps if they could have been deprogrammed, they could have repented, seen the truth, and lived. Yet they, like so many, were caught up in the lie of these things. I left there, Ethan. I left that strange world. I locked the hatch to the basement in that house in Trail, and I seldom compelled Stinky to open the portal beneath. Years went by where I left that place alone. I committed myself to learning English, learning it as perfectly as I could. There was a radio. I listened to it day in and day out. I repeated what it said, everything it said. You noticed. I still miss many words, unless, of course, we've had some of this fine nectar here. Carl indicated the water. But I can enunciate without a trace of Slavic accent. I was young enough to really internalize English. Still, I was a school-aged boy. Where was I going to get money? I would pester shopkeepers around town for jobs, of course. They had little in the way of help for me. Eventually, I was able to secure a position as a bathroom attendant at one of the casinos in Livestone, where such personnel came and went with frequency. A bicycle was all I needed to travel back and forth, and I was gangly enough at that age. No one gave me any trouble. I did my work. I strove to blend in. I took my pay and I bought food. As a Soviet, I was used to living with few utilities. So I lived that way for many years, only gradually building out until I made the house as grid independent as you have observed, minus the solar, of course. That is very recent. By the time I hit a sort of daily normal, a cruising altitude if you will, I was in my early 20s, and it was the 80s. I had spent more time in the world between worlds than I realized before my parents expired. I see why you're sensitive about your folks, Ethan observed. Carl put his hand on the table and gripped it for a moment, and then swallowed and said with a shaky half smile, "How could you know something like that before? You just heard the gossip of the town." "How did they come to know?" "Genevieve," Carl replied, and his voice truly shook. "They came to know through Genevieve." "Hold up. I think I can fill in some blanks here." Ethan said this suddenly, sensing emotion he wanted nothing to do with approaching. "Maybe some, but not all. I met her at the casino. I charmed her and became close to her, closer to her than anybody. She was deeply religious, but not Christian. She had wild ideas that probably were more rooted in her appreciation for science fiction than actual spiritual conviction. I come to know this later. Genevieve was not stupid. She came out of a group of drug-soaked hippies to trail limestone. I think she actually ended up bringing some of that culture with her incidentally. She, like me, was a castaway, but she also knew how to communicate deep, spiritual, New Age concepts to me. I was very academic about it, of course. You may think I am not that intelligent because I spoke in such short words before. She had a similar thinking, but could tell the lights were on and somebody was home, as the saying goes. I was smart, and she was not patronizing. She had forgotten more about New Age philosophy and science and history than I had ever known. She it was who helped me find the books on computation and simulation theory and the like. It was all very cutting-edge stuff. She introduced me to fractals, also cutting edge at the time. Mandelbrot only discovered his set in 1980 after all. She was also a nut when it came to UFOs. She believed in benevolent extraterrestrials evolving on separate timelines than our own. But I knew the reality, and that it was different. You... Yet, how could I share that with her? It prompted me to conduct my own studies. Collaterally, this led me to Christ. I encountered his spiritual firewall almost on accident. See, the occult practices, the New Age philosophies, they're always in opposition to the ideals of Christ. As such, there is a void around which they narrate. The Buddha talks about losing all desire. But where does desire come from? The Buddhists say what caused desire, but not why, not where that desire comes from. Why do we want things we've never known? How can we want such things? I understand sexual desire. There is a thing called sex. But why do I have a desire in me for perfection, for paradise, for heaven, if such concepts don't exist and never have existed? Why do I see a sunset and feel something in me that moves me emotionally even after I have seen it so many times? Why do I have this persistent yearning for that which I have never seen or known? The Christians explained it precisely. You must read from C.S. Lewis. I investigated such questions, and the answers of the New Age crowd leave much to be desired. Also, I had seen some of the New Age traditions in terms of rituals that Genevieve swore by. I knew they were busy work for those strange creatures who had done what they did to my parents. I knew much of that in which she put deep faith was in fact baseless. I knew it was a lie. So what did I do? I sought ways to explain one thing by another. I sought to find instances of the supernatural that were real. What I found was that throughout history, there has been a bipolar nature to supernatural phenomena, and that such things as we associate with extraterrestrials today existed in times of yore and were associated with the demonic or the elven or some such thing. Being able to read in Russian and English, I had dual access to a variety of resources she could not parse. Christ found me through my research. As you studied UFO phenomenon, others who have seen what you and I face now, Ethan, as you look into it, you learn there are not distant planets with tangent evolutionary lines. There are malevolent, localized entities going to and coming from somewhere nearby that we don't know. Well, we know now. You learn they don't respond well to Christianity too. So I found the Lord. I found that I loved Genevieve. And indeed, we had become a casual relationship that was increasingly intimate. One day we were drinking quite heavily, and I was prevailing on her to think about things in a new light. I was drunk enough and familiar enough with her that my guard was down. She already trusted me enough to spend time with me where I lived. I'm afraid I confide in her too much. I told her about my parents. I let it slip out how I held myself responsible to a certain degree. To give any context about it, I had to invent details that were impossible. And the story didn't add up, and she could sense I was fabricating something. She just didn't know what. She had such pretty green eyes, her black hair, dark as the night, a laugh like, well, you know, Ethan. But we truly had something. I was near your age, and we truly had something. But she knew I was keeping secrets from her, and she knew it had to do with my family, and she knew it didn't make sense that I owned a house, even though I had been painstakingly careful about determining all the documentation needed and keeping it orderly. She suspected I had a secret. Of course I did, but it was not a secret she wanted to be any part in. And because I knew this secret, I knew she was wrong and wanted to compel her. But I didn't want to show her why I knew that. Ethan, we had a huge fight, and she accused me of so many things, and was suddenly frightened by me, and got it into her head that I had murdered my parents, and stolen their largesse to live on as I pleased, alone on a hill. That had not happened. But some locals remembered my parents establishing the location legally long years ago. They never knew it was a sleeper spot for the Soviets. The rumor metastasized and spread, and she avoided me. Finally, I found her, and I confronted her, and I offered to prove it. I offered to prove to her that this place existed, and that God was real. For she could not believe in God, or bring herself to believe in Him. She could not believe in a God who is not modern, who is not thoroughly reflective of politically trendy ideologies. She was searching, her soul was hungry, and she was smart enough and honest enough to acknowledge essentially continuous hallucinogen use was not doing her any favors. But this Judeo-Christian stuff was a bridge too far in her perspective. Her progressive New Age mind would not accept it. She had the postmodernist mindset that we, mankind I mean, already knew everything, that we had conquered all the mysteries. And indeed the supernatural was a realm of old wives' tales, anachronistic to our time. This is the basic existentialist perspective. So she could pick and choose what philosophy she wanted and was most attracted to. It was all a game anyway, everybody knew that. But everybody didn't know that. We didn't know all those things then, and we don't now, and likely in my estimation never will in this corporeal realm. Ethan spoke up. That's what the angel told me the real world is called. What's that word? Corporeal. What's that mean? Physical, basically. Yeah. As I was asking it, the thought came to me. Ethan held up the glass of water, and Ethan looked at the water glass in his hand. Carl reset the gravity light. Anyway, I offered to prove what I said, what I believed who I was, where I was, that I was not a murderer or a creep or anything like that. I rose to her challenge like a fool. We came through in the basement with the cat, and she was sucked away by one of those cylindrical vessels inside a minute. I spent an hour in this world figuring out where they took her before I returned. I'm lucky she had not established deep roots here. She was seen as a fetching barfly of the long-term tourist variety. We had known each other only about 10 months, and she had been dividing her time between a high-class hotel in Livestone and my house. She was taken, Ethan, and the townsfolk thought she simply tired of her vacation, but she was taken. And I know where she has been taken, and I know how to get there, and I know what needs to be done to retrieve her, and I know that in her mind, under the influence of those strange creatures, it is only as though a few weeks have passed, though for me it has been many years as I come and I go and I prepare, as I build bunkers like this one and stock them and keep their utilities working. The battery for the fridge will run for 48 hours. That's years in the real world. I just need to sub out the battery once every couple of months, so I'm sure, a simple chore. I must do the little chores to keep the infrastructure I've built ready, so that when the time is right, I can free her and get her back. Here Carl unfolded the map on the table of the net. It was not as crude as Ethan expected. In fact, it was quite detailed. It was drawn to scale, a large portion in the center with perspective drawings on the side explaining components of the sketch that represented varying elements of associated topography. A great tower, a ziggurat of substantial height, was in the center of the map. The drawing showed massive shapes coming and going within it. Indeed, the tower Carl had drawn looked like a conch shell with the pointy end toward the sky and the wide end at the bottom. A beam of light was shown out that small end, shooting into the atmosphere, and all variety of shapes, many of them the now familiar cylindrical variety, could be seen drifting into the dark open maw toward the bottom of the conch. Beneath that was a snaking line of blue that appeared to be some sort of river. Carl pointed to it with his finger. I have a plan, Ethan. I have a way, and it's not ready yet, but I've been knocked off my schedule and my preparations are lagging. Batteries will fail. I will lose the advantage I have in only 2 days' time. I was very near in the real world. I was born over 80 years ago. In my mind, I've lived 45 years. I'm much more gray than I should be. And I can't help but wonder if it's the traumas I've seen that contribute to that. But I'm not so old, Ethan. Yeah, you seem in a way better shape than any 80-year-old grandpa ought to be. No wonder everybody thinks you're a vampire. Well, but now, Ethan, now we have to do it. And we have to do it soon, or it will take many years to set up again. And weeks will go by while Genevieve sleeps. And I will truly be an old man before I can see her free. If I can even see her free. If I have the ability to set her free. If it is even possible. You sure are a hypocrite though, fam. This time Carl was legitimately startled. What? Well, you told me all that stuff about the girl I was going after. Here you are making plans for years. And what are you doing? The exact same thing? Yeah, but you just about wrecked those plans, you little shit. You forced my hand. Carl banged the dinette table thunderously and the cat skedaddled under the bed at the other end of the trailer. Ethan held his hands out placatingly. You know, fair point, fair point. I really think that out very well before I said it. Obviously. So I'm with you, Carl. I'm with you. We get your girl, we get mine, we get out of here. If only it were that simple. Carl exhaled.